I mean, I never seen nothing like it. I said, that is one guy you don't want to mess with. Anybody who can take a Dremel tool and file off a tooth.
You can take it to the...
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back to Take It to the Bank podcast. This is the month of April, and we have got the law dog, lawyer himself, BPT, MLF champion, Mr. Jeremy Lawyer. We'll welcome in. I'm glad we got together. Thank you for coming and talking to us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having a good time on the show and seeing what we can talk about.
Well, we're going to get into some pretty hardcore, I feel like spawning talk here in just a second, but we both got a really good mutual friend named Mr. Drew Boggs, and Drew's as good a guy as there is in the Southeast United States when it comes to fishing shallow and that kind of thing. Was on the TV show with me last year. I want to hear your best Drew Boggs story.
Oh, that's easy. I tell you what, we were at the All-American, and he come in and said, boys, I tell you what, I'm going to be a little late for dinner. I got to stop by Lowe's and get a Dremel tool. I said, well, shoot, what, you going to make you a bait or something? He said, no, I'm going to grind on one of my tooth. He said, I broke it today or something. And he said, it hurts. And I said, well, let me know when you get to the house. I want to be there for that. And he showed up, and no BS, boy, he threw that thing on the table, and he had him a couple different bits, and he got him a big old grinding wheel on there. And he said, I'm going to go in the bathroom so I can see. I said, we're coming with you. So me and him and a buddy of ours, Dustin Lippy, we go in there, and I'm filming it. I'm like, I want to see this right here. And he kind of turned it on, and it was a multi-speed tool, and he kind of turned it on, and it just was kind of on low speed. It just, when he touched that tooth, it was just like barely pedaling a bicycle. Oh, it sounded terrible. And he's like, oh, that ain't going to work. And boy, he looked at it. Boy, he fired it up and cranked it up to about 10. Man, it sounded like a 200 Mercury then. He stuck it back in his mouth, and it didn't even really slow it down. You could tell when he was touching something, it'd merr. And then he'd just sit there, and he'd take it like a man now. I mean, like a champ. And he pulled her out of there and licked it with his tooth and said, oh, a little bit more. And boy, he fired her back in there. And when it was all said and done, he was eating a hamburger 15 minutes later. I mean, I never seen nothing like it. I said, that is one guy you don't want to mess with. Anybody who can take a Dremel tool and file off a tooth.
A Dremel tool till his own tooth.
He did a fine job too. You know, it wasn't like it was some old just halfway done deal. I mean, he did it top notch.
Well, we may have to get him on here when we're talking about flipping and pitching shallow here in a little while, but I'll have to ask him about that, and we may be able to find that video and post right here in the middle of this too. So that'd be pretty good.
Yeah, I know a guy might have it.
You got to be a tough son-of-a-bitch to Dremel your own tooth out.
You do, really. But he said, boys, it can't hurt no worse than what it is right now. So he said, I'm going to give it all I got. And so, but he was good to go the rest of the week. You know, he caught him after that. So, I mean, it didn't bother him any.
That's all that matters, I reckon. That is all that matters. That's a pretty dang good story, dude. Well, let's talk about the month of April. To me, you know, I feel like a lot of our fisheries, you know, the highland reservoir types set up, you know, a lot of the same as, you know, a lot of them in your part of the world. I feel like that northern Oklahoma area is really similar to Tennessee with, you know, some of the highlands with some of the muddy water with the rivers and all that good stuff. And in April, it changes so quickly. It's by the day, and fish are hard to stay with a lot of times. They're either, you know, some of them spawning, some of them's not. They're shad spawning. They're, you know, post spawn. It changes all the time. Is that something that it's like that in your part of the world too?
Oh, there's no doubt. You know, we could get a bunch of rain, and it could get in the bushes overnight and turn brown, and, you know, we get all the same circumstances, you know, and it's just something you just deal with around the Midwest with those kind of, you know, fisheries and those kind of conditions, especially in the month of April with the spring rains.
So, you know, this will be coming out on the 20. Should know this. We'll edit this part out. This is a podcast to be coming out on the 22nd of April. So we're past the middle of April, getting down to the third and fourth week of April. Fish spawning up there right now? Or are they still pre-spawn, or a lot of them going off bed? Really, what's the majority of the fish doing in your part of the world in the Ozarks?
Well, you know, really, the majority of the fish are probably spawning or pre-spawn. I'm not going to say we haven't had a few come off the beds, and there's, you know, you catch a fish. I mean, I was crappie fishing today and caught some crappie that I said, I believe that fish has been up on the bank and already come off. So, I mean, I think you're going to see some of that. But for the most part, there's probably the biggest majority have yet to spawn. I think there's a lot of cruisers, a lot of them looking around. And one thing that really kind of happened right now would be technically full blown spawn here in the Ozarks where I live. But we had 6-7 inches of rain, 8 inches of rain, just like 2 weeks ago, less than that. Maybe when I was at Kentucky Lake for a Toyota and the whole Midwest got the rain to cross through there. Then the lakes came up and boy, everything flooded the bank. And like today at Grand, when I got there this morning, it looked like they dropped it 7-8 inches overnight. And so I think a lot of them fish are a little bit leery of doing their thing, knowing that the lakes are falling. So I think as soon as you see just the water levels kind of stabilize just a touch from being up and now coming down, then I think you're going to see one big wave of spawn really start. And then there's definitely another one to come behind them. We've always got some spawners around the 1st of May on all the lakes. And so I'd say we've got a good bit of it yet to go.
A lot of people think that all fish spawn at the exact same time. But I have found, in my travels and fishing my part of the world and even everywhere else, that you have waves. I feel like you've got the biggest wave that will go at once. But now I've caught a fish on bed on 4th of July here on Old Hickory. Like there's fish that spawn a lot longer than just one big wave. So talk a little bit about, this is a time of year I feel like you can catch pre spawners, and post spawners really all on the same day.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And you're right about that late spawn. We'll catch some fish at Grand Lake and at Table Rock for sure, spotted bass, and on a Carolina rig or something like that out on a point, and it'll have a bloody tail. And it's spawning out there deep. There's no doubt about it. So they definitely trickle around. There's always some late bloomers. But, something that we can always tell is like the lower ends of the lakes are going to be last around here, no matter what lake you're on. And the upper ends are definitely going to spawn first, whether it's bass or crappie or whatever it is. And so you can kind of chase it that way too, to kind of fish the way you want to fish. If you want to catch pre-spawners right now, the lower end might still be your kind of game plan. Where if you go to mid lake or up one of the rivers, you're probably going to be dealing with some post-spawn and spawners right then, right now, So kind of pick your poison. And I think some of that's dictated by the water too. Like you go at the lower end, you're probably going to lose 2 or 3 degrees of water where, it's going to be just fuzz warmer back down that little bit stained or mid-lake area and stuff. There's no doubt that fish trickle through all phases of the spawn. But if you were to go to all different places of the lake on the same day, you could probably see it. So,
well, is there an area that you like to stay in or an area that you try to stay out of this time of year, or is really the whole lake in play?
Guido, he had been told me years ago, one time before Ever Start series take off. 15 years ago when we was at Lake the Ozarks, we made top 10 cut. And I said something about, I don't know what I'm going to do today. And he said, well, all I'm going to tell you is go where they're going, not where they've been. And he said, that'll take you a lot further. And, at the time, I didn't think too much about that. But I've really taken that to keep it between my ears over the years. And he's right. If you fish where they're going instead of where they've been, it seems like you can stay on fresher fish, more fish, cleaner fish, and more aggressive fish, And so they're not beat up yet and things like that. So as long as that's a possibility, if there's still some pre-spawners, a spawn going on, I'm probably going to chase that a little bit. For one, they're going to weigh more and they're going to be a little bit more aggressive a lot of times, depending on the lake you're on and, what the day is and all that. That's not true every day, but definitely they're going to weigh more. But that's probably my best piece of advice to somebody if they want to try and compete and stay ahead of the spawn, just fish where they're going, not where they've been.
Great advice. Is this a time of year you can turn your live scope off, or are you really using your electronics to find these fish?
The perspective mode that you see everybody using and everything with Garmin is really good. And like I can do it in my pond at my house, and the bottom is really silty. I got a lot of mud, and they'll fan it out, make a nice pretty bed. And you can really see a bass in a bed really good because the bottom's dark. When Bass was at the Pascagoula the other day, or however you say that.
That's one they'll call it Pascagoula.
I don't know, whatever it is, Pascagoula. Yeah. Out there in the ocean, but you could really see the fish good on perspective mode because the bottom was dark, and of course the fish were harder than the bottom. But like when you get down to Grand Lake or Lake the Ozarks or any of them, it's really a lot harder to see them because we have so much rock and gravel. And like I saw a 3-pounder today when I was crappie fishing, laying up on the bank on a bed, and I could not see him no matter what on that perspective mode. And I'm looking at him. I mean, I know he's right there. And don't get me wrong, when he spun in a circle one time, I was like, there he is right there. But the minute he'd sat still, I couldn't see him because everything under him was so hard. I'm going to use my eyes a lot in the Ozarks, if I'm going to be looking at them and everything. And the water's clean enough. You can get close enough to them and see them good and see them before they see you at Table Rock and even like the Ozarks on the lower end and different things. But it's just a lot harder to utilize that perspective without being in like a debris filled cut or something that's going to have a softer bottom.
Everybody talks about using that thing in Florida when they're spawning down there, and it's the exact same thing. It's just there's nothing down there but mud and sand, and those fish really stick out. Here, I feel like right here is really, really comparable to where you're at. And no, it's all rock, it's all gravel where they're spawning. You pretty much can't see them like that at all. And a lot of times here, the water's too dirty, to really see them good, period. I'm not a great sight fisherman because of that, but there's nothing any more fun, in my opinion, than you laying eyeballs on that fish and flipping to him and making him, pissing him off enough to finally make him bite. I love it.
Yeah, no doubt about it, and a lot of times, the water's dirty enough around here. You just got to figure out where they're kind of satting, if they're satting on roots or little ledges or, a little gravel nook or whatever. And you just kind of believe there's one in there. So you fish in there enough, till you either catch him or go on down the road. But, they'll kind of tell on themselves where they're setting a lot of times.
Well, let's use Lake of the Ozarks as an example. We'll get that pulled up here. Okay. So got Lake of the Ozarks pulled up. This is kind of the lower end of Lake of the Ozarks. Now, if you're going to look for spawners, which is what, pretty much a man needs to be doing right now, where do you look for first? And, give us some areas that you're going to go to and how you actually find these spawning fish.
Well, I mean, if you're going to go down to that lower end, like say between the toll bridge and the dam, put in a Shawnee Bend area or something like that, first off, I want to just take off right there somewhere and just see if I can see some fish cruising. Just see if I see a bed or two. If there's a boat ramp, a private boat ramp you're putting in at, just look around you at the first little pocket or little gravel spot behind the boat dock and just kind of start hunting and pecking around and looking. But now there is going to be times, especially early in the spawn, wherever the sun is hitting the best on the north shores, not necessarily just the north bank line, but if you go in a creek arm, like say, for instance, Buck Creek, the north side of Buck Creek might be better than the south side, depending on if it's early or if it's a full-blown spawn. Once they get spawning full-blown, they'll be on both sides, and the warm nights will keep everybody happy and all that. But when you first start out, sometimes just because you go down the south side of a pocket or something and you don't see anything, there may be a handful on the north side. But now once they all get to going, they'll be on both sides. But any kind of irregularity in the bank, little flat spot, little drain, behind the boat dock where you can see the gravel set up, under the walkways, I think them fish like that shade, different things like that. You can run all the way to back and start in the back and work your way out. Just kind of depends on what's available, where you're around. The stuff right on the main lake, you can kind of cross it off a little bit. Not that they won't be there, but you got to have a good day to look in those areas. If you've got a lot of boat traffic or a lot of wind, it's going to be hard to see them on those main lake places. And they kind of like to get out of the ways. But now a lot of times you can find a big one, on a main lake little pocket close out there, that's just got a little place to slide up. For the most part, look for a protected area, look for someplace that the sun's really going to beat down on and kind of get warm on their backs, and then look for something flat like a gravel spot or an irregularity, something they can set up on.
With as much hard cover as we have, what kind of bank line are you looking for to find spawners?
It really doesn't take
everywhere.
Well, I mean, obviously, you got a couple things against you if you're on a super flat bank. I mean, obviously, you got best gravel and stuff for them to spawn on, but they can spawn out there where you can't hardly see them either, 5 foot deep. If you're in a steeper bank that's just got some little shelf rock on it or something like that, as long as there's a shelf that sticks out 2 foot, 18 inches, and has some gravel on it, that bass will spawn right there on top of it. He won't make a traditional circle bed like you see on TV a lot and everything. He'll spawn right there on that rocky bank on a set of tree roots, just kind of depends on what the water's doing and everything. But for the most part, I would just as soon be on like a a semi steep bank, 45 degree, or maybe a hair flatter if it's around there. But, in order to see them, because if you get in a place that's just really flat, the one you can probably see is probably not the one you care to catch. And then if you've got a steeper bank, when it gets to a little flat spot or behind a boat dock in a pocket or something, it kind of narrows down maybe where they want to set up too, and they'll be in water to where you can still see them. And so I try to go into a place that is steep with some irregularities, and I shouldn't say steep, steeper than flat, with some irregularities rather than just a big flat gravel bay. Now, a lot of guys are not very good spot fishermen, and they don't enjoy doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think those are the guys that utilize a lot of the flatter stuff where they can just throw something up there and drag it, whether it's shaky head, Carolina rig, something like that, and hope to drag it across their bed and traditionally fish more for spawning fish without looking at them. And that's really just kind of whatever a person's opinion is or how they enjoy to do it.
So are you looking for, got the map pulled up here. I think you can see it there. Are you wanting shorter pockets? Or are you wanting these longer pockets? Or are you trying to get in, in the very backs of, the bigger creeks or the smaller creeks? What are you actually trying to go look at? Like, to me, I've never been on Lake of the Ozarks, not once, but a lot of these little shorter pockets right here, they're on the north side. They're going to be catching a lot of the sun. To me, that area right there would be a good place to look. Are you looking for shorter pockets or are you looking for the longer creek arms?
Well, there's no doubt that those shorter pockets that you were kind of mousing around on, those aren't very short. I mean, they are, but they go back in there 200 or 300 yards.
Right.
That's a fairly big pocket, and the best part about it is it's close to the main lake, but it's got some protection and everything to where them fish can go back behind the boat dock and set up and absolutely, I'd run those. I'd run the big creek arms. You almost got to find an area and just look, because if you try to run from big creek arm to big creek arm, I mean, you'll eat up a day's time trying to look. And that fish, he's not going to swim to the biggest creek arm to spawn if he's not close to one. So it's kind of a catch-22 to say, are they bigger or better? I would definitely pick out one like there on the left, that forked one that's kind of goes back in there the furthest. Yeah,
those two.
Those are not big pockets either, but they got some irregularities in them, and they get off the main lake just a fuzz. That very last one on the left that just has that one little bay cove, it's probably going to be susceptible to the wind. Would a fish spawn in it? Is there going to be fish spawning in it? Absolutely. Are you going to be able to see them? Only with the perfect conditions. And so it's not the fact that you can't find a spawner. It's the fact that during the conditions of that day, you may not be able to see them, just because the fact that boat traffic, wind, whatever, in a small pocket like that, that's acceptable to it. Where those bigger pockets, you can tuck in behind the boat dock or get back in there enough. There's enough houses to block the wind and everything. But I mean, I've spent like those creek arms are on the bottom left, Deer Valley and those right there. I mean, you can spend all day in there sight fishing. I mean, there is a lot of room to cover right in there. And you're just as apt to find a 5-pounder on a straight stretch in there as you are in one of them little pockets. And so you just got to put some trolling motor time in and really, really look. And then, I guess the second thing you need to decide is if you're able to catch that fish or not. Just because you see him up there doesn't mean you can catch him. And so I think you just put a lot of total motor time in. You look around in all the obvious places and then some off-the-wall stuff. If you're seeing a lot of bedded fish in the obvious places, the little nooks and crannies, you better get to looking on the sides, because there's probably no begging up there. Ain't nobody pestered. But a lot of guys, especially like the Ozarks, will go in a lot of those bigger creeks. So if you find something in a little bit smaller creek, there's probably a chance you'll have it to yourself compared to some of them bigger ones. They just attract a lot of attention, but they've got a lot of fish living in them too. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, you touched on something right there about finding fish that you can actually catch. Now, what does that mean to you? So we're rolling down the bank. We're in one of those pockets that we've just picked out there, and we see one on the bed. Are you looking for one fish or two fish? Everybody talks about catching the male, not catching the male, catching him and getting him pissed off and then turning him loose. Like, tell me what you're looking for, obviously, other than size of fish, to make you want to stop and think, okay, I can catch that one.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, traditionally around here, it's hard to catch them if there's two on the beds. I'm not saying you can't, but a lot of places that female will stay there 2 or 3 days. Florida, she may stay there multiple days, a week, and hang around the area. Here in the Ozarks, I think you better catch her that day or she's not going to be there again. So a lot of the fish we catch, even though they might weigh 5 pounds, it's probably a 5-pound male. It's not a female. And so I tell you, a lot of times I'll be cruising down the bank pretty fast and I'll look up there at one and see him and I'll just throw my power poles down. And if it drags on the bottom and makes all kinds of noise and it stops me and that fish runs off, he doesn't come back in just a second, he probably is not going to be catchable. I mean, now, not to say you can't sneak up there to him, but the ones that are really that you can count on is when you make all kinds of racket and then he's back up there in 20 seconds and he doesn't want to leave, and that fish is aggressive and hot. You're probably going to catch him pretty easy. But you've always, you see a 5-pounder just because he spooks off doesn't mean the next day you don't ease up there and try to slide, a wacky rig on him or fish from a long distance or even throw a top water over him, But it just seems like to me, if you can make a little racket when you see them and they still stay right there or close and come right back, they're probably be a fish that's going to play a little bit easier. Now, once you start fishing for one, it just kind of depends on what he wants to do. If he swims off and he comes back in 10 seconds, the minute you move your bait, he swims off again and he doesn't come back for a minute. And then, you're probably playing cat and mouse there quite a little while. Still not to say that fish isn't catchable, but it depends on if you got the first fish you found in the morning time to mess with him, or you've got 20 minutes you got to get to weigh in. You probably better go on and find another fish. There's a lot of different variables when sight fishing, and it just kind of depends on what the situation is and the situation to whether you got time to catch him or the bait to catch him or you need him or don't need him or, it's just lots of different things.
So a good bag up there, let's just use Lake the Ozarks right now. When they're spawning, what's a good bag?
Well, no doubt. 20 pounds is a good bag anywhere, but you better have 20 pounds if you're thinking about walking up there and getting any kind of money back, but it's got so many 4-pounders in the lake and it's got a lot of 5-pounders. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have a lot of 6s and 7s and 8s. Not that guys don't catch a few. And every now and again, we'll have a phenomenal day where they weigh in 5 7s and you're like, gosh, dang, had 5 7-pounders a day. But that's normally really pre-spawn and kind of rare. But as far as like 4-pounders, the lake is absolutely chock full of it. I mean, there's been tournaments before where a guy weighs in 20 and doesn't even get a check, see you next week. They paid 15 places and they had 20, 25, 19 to 21 pound bags. And you just didn't get anything out of the deal. So, it can be a little bit heartbreaking, but it's also a really fun place to fish because it's just got such quality in it.
No doubt. I have problems telling how big they are.
Yeah.
I rolled through a pocket last week in a tournament and I was like, there's just a bunch of 2-pounders in there. But we went back just to start there so we could start with a limit and ended up having 4 for like 11.5 pounds. I mean, they were a lot better fish than I realized. To me, the water makes them look smaller.
Oh, definitely it does. And the deeper they are, the worse it is. And there's no doubt, I think it's just something a guy just gets used to seeing, crappie fishing today. I shoot inside there and the gentleman with me said, I can't see my jig. I said, oh, it's right there. It's coming through him. He said, I don't see it. And then I'd point it. Oh, I see it. Well, then by the end of the day, he wasn't asking anymore. He could see it. And so I think he just picked up over the few hours of doing it about there's where it is. Well, I think after a person catches a few of them and then gets disappointed a time or two as well, he just gets used to what size the fish is and everything like that to where it gets easier. But sometimes, depending on the glares or pollen or how deep that fish is, it's still tricky. And sometimes you waste your time on him and say, shoot, it didn't even help, And so that's just the nature of it. And I also think that's why some people prefer not to do it.
Right. From what I've seen, a lot of times when one faces you dead on, you can tell how wide that fish is. A 2-pounder is going to be that wide and a 4-pounder is going to be that wide. Like I can judge them by how thick they are versus how long they are a lot of times.
There's no doubt, but obviously if it's a super shallow fish, you've got a lot better gauge on him.
Right.
But so many of these fish here spawn to where you can the ones you need, just to where you can just barely see them. You can see they're bad and you can see them swim through it every now and again, or you can see their movement. You get a 5-pounder up there in 2 foot of water. That's like a gift. So, I mean, you just don't get that a lot.
Do you have any do you have any tricks to try to see them for a guy that's either not looked at them a lot or don't think that they're very good at sight fishing?
Well, I mean, no, I think, it's just as good as your eyesight is. And I think the taller guys have an advantage. I think getting on a step stool, if it's legal, definitely helps. If you can get on one, if it's a team event and your team partner can run the trolling motor and you can stand on a 3-step platform step stool and look down there at them, definitely helps a bunch. It definitely helps just to see them. But, it's just how good your eyesight is. And I've been with guys that flat out just didn't even see them, co-anglers over the years and different things, to where we went by some fish and they were looking in the water and said, I never even saw where the fish was at, and I'm like, well, he's right there, but we don't need him, so we're going on. But sure. I mean, just kind of depends on your situation. Everybody's just kind of a little bit different. And I mean, I'm getting these dadgum things on more and more anymore. So, I mean, it's just getting harder to see them too. So some of these young guys can definitely probably see them better.
And some guys are legit just better than John Cox. I feel like he can see one on the ground, through the ground. Like he knows, he's looked at so many of them. He knows what they look like. He's amazing at it. And then some other guys, roll past fish that he sees. Something that's always helped me is something my granddad told me when we were deer hunting forever ago. He's like, you don't look for a whole deer. You look for a part of a deer. And that's the same thing I try to do when I'm sight fishing as well, is a lot of times I'm not looking for a whole fish. I'm just looking for a tail, or I'm looking for a lateral liner. I'm looking to see just a little bit of movement, especially with a little bit of stained water, a little bit of wind, whatever. If you can look for parts of fish, it's a lot easier to see a part of fish than it is to see a whole fish a lot of time.
Oh, there's no doubt. We do a lot of gigging in the wintertime, and when the lights start coming up on a mess of red horse or something, they'll kind of be blue out there in front of you. You can see them in them lights. And I think a lot of time around here, you can see that blue stripe in the water, and it's a bass, before you can see a green fish or see
right.
move. When you see that blue stripe, especially like in buckbush or something like that in front of you, if you're wacky rigging around or something, then that blue stripe will kind of give them away a little bit, because that's just kind of how they look under the lights. But, if a person's never done that, they wouldn't know what to compare that to. So I think everybody's probably just going to have to live and learn a little bit on their terms.
Well, you mentioned wacky rigging there. Give me some sight fishing baits. Now, do you just have one? Are you like Drew Cook and Drew Benton, where you're only flipping a fighting frog at them, or do you have a variety of baits when you're bed fishing this time of year?
Well, I'll be honest with you. We catch a lot more fish knowing that he's there and knowing that the bed's there, but not getting up there and actually poking on him or anything like that, because there's so many people here in the Ozarks that fish every single day of the week. I mean, just like today on the water, you thought it was a Saturday. You're like, my gosh, it's Wednesday. What the heck, Don't
any of these sumbitches work?
Yeah, and so the days of being able to slide up there and take a Texas rig and catch them, we get the opportunities for that, no doubt. But it's just a really small window. And so when you see like Drew Cook and Drew Benton catch them a lot of times, like at, say, Santee Cooper or Florida, those fish are spawning for 2 months. We don't get that kind of time. These fish are up there doing their duty and rolling on. But this is probably the one time of the year that I feel like I can catch 20 pounds on a spinning rod. And it's not going to bother me a bit to just have like a nail weight Nico rig, a wacky rig, something like a Zoom Slinky on there, and then a Zoom Trick worm with a nail weight in the end of it, and just stuff that looks real natural, and a fish that's really been worked hard from somebody else, and you slide up there to him with something finesse, you can normally catch that fish. Even just like a shaky head or a Ned rig, you can definitely get a lot of those fish before you even have to set up to actually sight fish for them. Now, the trade-off of that is if you can set up on them and flip 20 pound with a flipping stick on them, there's a good chance you're probably going to land him.
Right.
The chances of getting him to bite it. And I also feel like, too, is you're a little more competitive by the end of the day, because you probably got to fish for twice as many fish and you got twice as many bites. If we were in a place where you had to have a 6, 8, 10 pounder to compete, kind of like Florida is sometimes, it may be a whole different ball of wax. But here, quality and consistency will go a long ways. But you can definitely do a lot of damage with a spinning rod on the bedded fish this time of the year and kind of roll through the numbers.
So let's talk about your wacky rig setup. Now, are you a a nail weight guy most of the time, or do you like it, completely weightless? Let's talk about your entire setup.
Well, there's no doubt that if the water's super skinny, that I'm going to do it 100% weightless. If I'm skipping it under walkways, behind boat docks, boat floats, that kind of deal, I'm just going to have like a 7'4" Denali with 16-pound Sunline SX1, and then like a 12-pound Sunline leader on there. I don't really go any lighter than that. Doesn't seem like there's a need for it. The days of throwing 6-8 pound tests are kind of behind me. I even go up 14, 16 sometimes if there's a lot of shrubbery. Just like a size 2 B10S stinger hook from Gamakatsu, and then a Zoom's Linky. Whether I put a Wacky rig on it as far as like weightless, or if I put a little tiny nail weight in the end of it from the hardware store, it doesn't really matter. Just depends on what my depths are. And also if it's really windy, like if it's really windy and there's a lot of chop on the water, that wind will catch that braid and drag it a little bit. And if I want it to go down a little faster, then I'll just stick a nail weight in it. And sometimes I'll stick that nail right in the middle of it, right next to my hook, and then just cut it off on the back side. So it'll fall more Wacky style, but I got a little bit of weight there. And so I'll just go to the hardware store and buy a 100-count box of ring shank nails that are 3/4 of an inch long, and run it through there, and then clip it off on the back side with a pair of pliers and go on with it. There's a time and a place for tungsten, and definitely deeper situations, or if you're actually trying to fish a shell bed or something out deep structure, you need to get it down there. But around the spawn, just a little bit of weight helps, and you can buy a box of them for $3 or $4 or something, and it takes a lot of them, because if you throw off a slinky, then you got to have another nail as well. But
right.
You can turn around and stick it right in the end and push that nail till it goes right to the head of a trick worm or a slinky, and it hides in there and it won't come out. And I don't know, it's just a really easy, inexpensive way to get you a little bit of weight. But I throw it a ton like that either way. But same setup on either worm.
Now, will you do a true floating, like a Texas rig floating worm very much, methylate, white, anything like that? Or are you leaning more towards the natural colors of green pumpkins, watermelons, that kind of thing?
No, if I know a fish is there and he's on a bed, I'm gonna throw something natural, and I'm gonna throw something that I want him to approach slowly. Where if I'm searching for him rolling down the bank pretty fast, I'll definitely throw a methylate trick worm bazoon. They're right down there in front of the boat, and work it fast and try to either get them to come up and show themselves, or at least show themselves if you don't catch them, and then you can throw something back in there behind them, a shaky head or Nico or something, and normally catch that fish. But methylate's really about the only color I carry anymore. We've been some places where yellow and white and pink have kind of played, so I always have them in the truck. But it seems like methylate, if they won't bite that, they won't hardly bite anything.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you stick in your boat for the month of April, maybe a little bit of May, and then it goes back to the peg, hanging the rest of the year for me.
Yeah. On a glide bait or a mag draft or something like that, a Chad Shad, them definitely are baits that will do the same thing, and you can kind of power fish with them rather than throwing a methylate trick worm. But get the fish to show themselves. They may not eat it, but they come up off a bed or a piece of structure or something there, I believe. And so I've had really good success turning around throwing something else back on them than trying to catch them with a glide. I'm just not a big glide guy, but there's definitely a time and a place for it in my arsenal, and that's one of them around the spawn.
That's something a lot of people don't talk about. To me, a glide is one of those things that they'll never win a 4-day tournament on it. Everybody loves them now. They're all the rage, with big swim baits and all these different ones. At the Classic this year, it was the Clutch booth and the Piz booth or whatever they are. A bunch of those booths, had a bunch of lines around them. And I'm not a glide guy. Like I've enjoyed throwing them. It's pretty cool. But to me, there's such a good fish finding bait versus a fish catching bait.
No, 100%. I've seen way more 20-pound bags than I've ever caught on them. They're a good bait for a one cast here, one cast there kind of deal for me. But some of the guys really have done well on them, and kudos to them. But it's kind of like a jig fisherman or whatever kind of finesse fisherman you want to be, you got to kind of pick your poison.
Yep. So we got a wacky rig. We've got also, either a floating worm or just a trick worm, Nico rigged or wacky rig. We got a glide. Give me a couple more baits that you're always going to have on the deck this time of year.
Man, I'll tell you what, I'm definitely going to have a chicken rig on there. I don't know.
What the hell's a chicken rig?
Well, if everybody throws it the same way, it's more or less just a really tiny Carolina rig, but I'm going to throw it on a spinning rod and just throw it with like an 1/8 or a 1/4 ounce weight. I mean, something really small. Quarter would be big, 3/16, and just make your leader about 12, 14 inches long. I'm telling you what, that thing is something that just gets you a lot of bite, catches a lot of fish on those days where it's not going well and you're not getting a lot of bites and you're going to need to change up. And it'll catch all 3 species. And the number one, no doubt, I'm going to put a baby brush hog on there. And might be watermelon, might be green pumpkin, might be watermelon red. Nothing too fancy. But put a little chartreuse dye on there if the water's got a little stain to it. And just fan cast that thing around in spawning areas, throw it down in front of bushes, drag it down beside boat docks, flat places where they're going to spawn. And it just gets a lot of bites. The Carolina rig, I've had more co-anglers over the years catch fish behind me, whether it was 1 or 15-pound limit on a Carolina rig. But when you throw that Carolina rig up there and, 2, 3, 4 foot of water, it's kind of big and bulky and it doesn't seem to work the same way. And so that's the one time a year I'll definitely have that on the deck and drag it around some. And then, probably the other bait that's going to have to be some sort of a walking bait, like a haint or something that's just going to make a lot of noise, walk back and forth, and then kind of draw one up off the bed. Just seems like that walking bait definitely works well around the spawn, and it'll get you a really big bite, and it's one of them baits you can throw underneath the boat dock walkway and only twitch it 3 or 4 or 5 times if that's all the room you've got. And if he's there, he's going to smash it. And so it might get a little western to get him out of there, but you can at least hook up with him. And that's probably about the arsenal I'm probably going to have, besides actually getting up there with some sort of Texas rig and actually beating around on them, trying to aggravate them.
Let's go back to this chicken rig, because that's the first time I've heard somebody talk about one of those in a long, long time. You're talking about an 1/8 to 3/16, a quarter, somewhere in that neighborhood. Are you still tying a swivel in there in between it? Or something that little, you can probably put bobber stops on it, can't you?
Well, I don't though. I don't. I take and still try it traditionally, but I tie it to braid, just straight to my braid, and I'll still use that Sunline SX1. I will take a black Sharpie and I'll Sharpie it up to where it's black for 3 or 4 foot rather than being yellow. I just feel it's a confidence thing for me. A lot of times I don't know that matters fish. And then just put my little bullet weights tungsten, like a 3/16. Yeah, I very rarely ever throw a quarter. It's normally an 1/8 or a 3/16, and then a bead, and then I'll put a bobber stop below it right there. And so that way that sinker and stuff doesn't beat against your knot on your swivel. Then I'll put a really tiny swivel, like a number 5 or something swivel, or even a 2. It's pretty small. And then just a 10 or 12 pound leader, and I've played around with a little bit bigger leaders, 14 and 16, and it just acts like the fish. You don't get as many bites. That bigger leader maybe drags that bait a little different. So I probably throw 12 more than I throw anything. If I was to go to Table Rock or something, I was in open water, I'd probably throw 10. But anyways, and this like a 1/0 little Gamakatsu EWG style hook, and hook it on there, and that's why we call it the chicken rig, because you don't feel manly throwing the dadgum thing, but it'll definitely get you some bites, So
I could see that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys around here throw Carolina rigs with a 1/2 ounce weight or something, a little bit lighter than normal on a bait caster, but that's pretty interesting. And especially with a baby brush hog on there. When it comes to EWGs, I'm super picky about my EWGs. I feel like they've definitely got their place. I went to a straight shank a lot when I'm flipping and seem to have a lot more success with that. What specific EWG do you throw?
I throw the the Nano EWG Super line or Alpha Nano % of the time. I very rarely ever throw a regular wire EWG. I never throw a round bend. I do throw a lot of straight shanks. I do like to flip with a straight shank, especially on braid and stuff, the tournament grade series. But around any of the finesse stuff, I definitely throw the lighter wires, just because the fact that, you're just using lighter equipment, it penetrates them easier and all that. But with fluorocarbon and the bigger rods, the Alpha Nano series, especially in the EWG lineup, super line is pretty much my arsenal 90% of the time.
And then you're not actually fishing for fish that you're looking at with that typically. You're just fan casting it kind of in between places that you're looking at fish and dragging it around. I mean, just fishing like a Carolina rig.
Yeah, for sure. But I couldn't tell you how many times, though, I've went down the bank and I've seen a fish and I've come back and I've messed with him and tried to get him to catch him and couldn't catch him, or maybe somebody pestered him already, whatever the case is. And be in that creek and keep messing around. And 45 minutes later, before we leave, I'm like, I'm going to slide over and throw that chicken rig at that fish and see what happens and catch that fish. I mean, I've done it a lot, and so, I mean, it's just always kind of something I got a lot of confidence in. But I mean, the month of April and maybe the first couple weeks of May is just the time of year where I feel like I can catch a competitive big bag on a spinning pole. And so I'm not afraid to use it that time of the year. But other than that, then I'm going to slide it up, after that. And really, I should say, definitely have to throw a shaky head in there. But I just feel like some of this other stuff, a little more weightless, a little more finessey looking, just gets you some more bites once the spawn gets going. Because every co-angler in the back of the boat's throwing a shaky head, and there's nothing wrong with that. But they see them a good bit.
What's your preferred Texas rig bait when you're actually looking at them and that whole setup?
I'm either going to go two ways on that. I'm going to say a Zoom critter crawl Texas rig, the little tiny thing.
A critter crawl.
Yeah, just the critter crawl by himself, and I'll put like a 4/0 hook in that. It'll barely fit in it. That eye's kind of out of it, and it's back between his eyes, and
right.
that critter crawl definitely is a fish catcher. It kind of irritates him. It's not really that big. It's not that bulky, but it still kind of gets their attention enough to where they don't want it in there. You can get a lot of bites on that. And then, I'm probably just going to throw an old school tube on them, whether it's white or green pumpkin. That tube, maybe them tentacles moving real easy or something, just seems to get a lot of bites. And then, and even sometimes rather than Texas rigging, I'll just put it on a great big drop shot, on a 25-pound sunline shooter and flip it in there on a half-ounce weight or a 3/4 ounce weight on the bottom of my drop shot and really get, beef it up with them, and you'll get a lot of bites. You'll get a lot of bites that way.
Yeah, that's something that I've really noticed is, especially when you're fishing either behind people or for some pressured fish, being able to get that bait off the bottom, a few inches and shaking it right there on their nose, get you a lot of bites when, you flipped on them on the bottom or whatever for a few times.
Well, there's no doubt. If you watch them like right now on forward-facing sonar and you're throwing a minnow out there shaking at them, and once that minnow goes below center line of their face, and then fish have to turn down a little bit, they're not near as susceptible to want to bite it, and they're not near as susceptible to think that it's real then. And I think those fish on those beds, even though they're just suspended 6-8 inches, a foot off the bottom, whatever it is, if you can keep that eye level with him, you got a way better chance of him thinking this is real and this is annoying and I'm fixing to eat it, compared to if he's got to turn down and take the effort to do that. It's definitely, I think, longer and harder to get a bite.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your tube setup. To me, that's something that you've got to have pretty dialed to get a hook in a lot of those fish. Jake Lawrence and I was talking about this, just this week on the podcast, that he throws a stupid tube on spawning smallmouth a lot on Kentucky Lake, and he's gotten away from it going to a shaky head Ned rig style type deal because he doesn't get as many of those fish in the bait. A tube's always been a bite getter, but it's also been a way to lose some fish too. Talk about your tube setup and what tube it is and what you figured out to kind of get around that bite to land ratio.
Well, I mean, first off, just to narrow it down for sure, is I get plumb away from like a flipping tube. I do not want a big, bulky, thick tube. I don't want to have a solid head. I want it to be kind of a weenie tube. I want it to rip. I want it to if I go through one every fish, so be it. But I don't want it to be big. It doesn't have to be big. the old gets it style is kind of what's, if everybody remembers that, where you slid an actual lead head long shank hook inside a tube, for the gets it. But Zoom makes a really good one that does not have a solid head. And I throw it a lot. It's a 4-inch, and it's super soft, tears really easy. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. I've got some homemade ones and some I've had over the years, some white ones. And you get in a bait shop someplace, and you're like, oh man, look at that tube. And it'll always be some cheap, no name brand, something or other, kind of skinny maybe. And you're like, boy, I bet that hook them good during the spawn. And so I always kind of get some here and there. But that's more like what I'm looking for. I don't want a big, fat, double dipped, triple thing tube, that's something you'd flip, because you do have a heck of a time with it balling up. And, there's tube hooks out there and different ways to rig it. But I still just use a 3 or a 4, and if you can, use a size bigger hook. And if your eye is out of the top of the tube, that's fine by me. I don't like it that way when I'm flipping cover or anything. But if my eye is up out of the tube and then the sinker is touching the eye right there, I don't feel like I'm going to be around enough cover to where it's going to matter to either beat on the bottom wrong and wear my line or anything like that. But it also makes your hookup ratio a lot better because it's already setting, in that groove. So
there's Fido.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna have to pause it right here, man. This thing, my wife just came home, and I'm telling you now,
we got some 5 squirrel dogs in there. They coon dogs, or what are they, lawyer?
I can't even hear you. Do what?
I said, do we have a 5 squirrel dog or coon dogs, or what are they?
Oh, I tell you what, we got 3 blue merle Australian Shepherd crosses, but one's a long hair, one's a short hair, and one's a tiny. So, but it thinks it's the biggest. So they're all getting after it now. So, but she'll come walking in there and they'll all kind of quit. But when she comes home, they do that every single night. Can you imagine putting up with that every single night, listening to that right there? I mean, holy cow. One of them gets excited and they all get excited.
Well,
but
I bet your wife just wishes you were excited when she got home as they are.
Yeah. She's going to take them outside now. But anyway, so yeah, you better cut that part right there.
That'll make a real good clip. We'll be all right there.
Yeah.
Well, what hook are you using on your tube? And when you're flipping on these fish, what size weight are you using?
Well, I'm gonna throw a Gamakatsu EWG Superline is what it's gonna be. Now, what size it might be, it's gonna be a size bigger than what you probably should think it should go in the tube. So if you put it in there and you got room for a bigger hook, you should use a bigger hook, because for one, they're not looking at the hook. 2, you're not trying to keep it from getting hung up in cover. 3, you want the biggest hook you can get in that thing because you got the best chances, because that daggum tube's a little bit risky, like you were saying, balling up 100%. But the bigger hook definitely keeps it from doing it, especially when you expose it, have it out the other side and the eye's out the top. It'll hold in that cradle, the R bend, where they made the 90 degree, way better if it's rigged that way rather than with the eye already hid, underneath the end of it. And then I'm going to go to a lot heavier sinker than what you would really, a lot of people are going to flip a 1/4 or 3/8. I'm probably going to go a 1/2, and then it may go to a 5/8, because a lot of times when you're trying to shake that tube, if it's got light line or light to sinker and you got any kind of wind and you're throwing it on 20 or 25 pound, like Sunline Shooter, then it's moving, and it's moving out of their bed at the same time. And I want it to kind of stay put. I want to be able to move it and shake it, and then I want it to stay put. And then if you do have to arouse it a little bit more and maybe poke on him just a bit with it, you got a little bit more weight to actually get his attention with.
Touched on a pretty good topic right there. I don't think a lot of people realize. Let's go through when you're seeing a 4 or 5 pounder on bed, he's down there 3 or 4 foot deep. You can barely see him, but you can see the bed. You can see him moving around. We've bumped our power poles and it's scraped on the bottom. He's staying there, and we're going to set up and fish for this thing. Kind of go through your progression of baits, or what how you aggravate that fish enough into biting. Usually, I know they're all different. And, one thing sight fishing tells us is these things have personalities just like we do. But as, a typical fish, how are you going to try to get him to bite, and how are you going to try to aggravate him to bite? And if he doesn't, then what steps do you go to finally piss him off enough to go meet you bait?
I got you. Well, I'll tell you what, first thing I'm going to do is like set up with my poles down to where I've got the sun at my back. Even if it puts a shadow out there towards him a little bit, I don't care. I don't want the shadow on him, obviously, but I want him having to look into the sun at me rather than me being on the other side and the sun glaring off of me where he's seeing the flash of my trolling motor shaft and graphs and everything. And so that's probably a big thing. And if it's not doable, it's not a deal breaker. But if I get the chance when I approach a fish on game day and I know he's there already, I'm going to approach him from that direction. And then I'm going to slide up there and get set up, kind of see what he's doing. I'm not going to just pull up there. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that. I'm obviously going to make a few casts at him with something from a distance, and let's just say that works. And then you slide up there and there he sits and you're like, well, dadgum, he didn't even partake in any of the other stuff. Well, then I'm going to set up and I'm going to just try and pitch it past his bed, ease it up there to him, and then just kind of shake it into his bed. I mean, it's just going to walk up there nice and easy, slow. I'm going to shake it, bring it to him. You can tell when that fish sees it, his fins will start moving. He'll turn a little bit. He'll look at it. And I'm going to pull it up there to him as close to his nose as I can get. And if he backs away from it and swims off, then I'm going to leave it there. He'll come back. And when he sets back up, then I'll slide on him for a second again, And if he backs up again, then he'll probably swim off. Well, I'm going to wind it out that time. Then I'm going to throw it back over there before he gets back and kind of get back ready. So when he slides up there again, I'm already back in there ready for him to go. And so if I do that a few times and stuff like that, and what'll happen is he'll start getting tighter and tighter where he won't swim off as far and he won't leave and he'll just turn in a circle and stuff like that when he's starting to get a little aggravated by it too. So a lot of times if you can't get him to bite by kind of looking around on his nose with it and everything, I'll turn around and when he gets where he wants to set, there'll always be a place he wants to set. I'll put it behind him and I'll rub it on the end of his tail and pull it up there and make him turn in a circle, get that off his tail. And I couldn't tell you how many times that pisses them off more than having it in their face. They don't like that line touching their tail. They don't want it behind them. They can't see it behind them. And then as he gets to spinning around, when he spins about the third time when I rub it on his tail, I'm going to hop that bait and try and get my timing down as he spins in a circle. And sometimes, especially, he get him to flare his gills or blow at it or something and wind in, get ready again. And if you do that enough times, you can get your timing down. Sometimes when he turns because you got it on his tail and you hop that off that bed, he'll just engulf it. Yeah, I just got it. And so, and I mean, there's so many different variables and circumstances and everything like that that would just kind of be an ideal setup, to where you can do all that. But if you can't get him to aggravate him by his nose, work on his tail a little bit. And a lot of times that'll definitely get him.
Yeah. Very first time I ever saw a guy do that, I was fishing a BFL as a co-angler. I don't know, 1920, something like that. And this dude took a 3/4 ounce weight and I felt bad for this fish. He whooped the piss out of him.
Yeah.
It's like a 4.5 pounder. And he just beat him in the side. And he'd hit him in the side of the head and he'd hit him in the tail. And fish never would run off. And the more he did it, the more aggressive that fish got. He would try to pick up that bait with a 3/4 ounce weight in it. But a lot of times he'd just get the tail or something like that. And he'd do that 2 or 3 times and get him to where he would actually carry it off. And then he flipped a Texas rig in there with a 1/4 ounce weight.
Yeah.
A little bitty bait. And he, as soon as it went in, he gagged on it and he caught him. I was like, damn, I've learned something here.
Yeah, you just got to be in that situation to know that that's the timing to pick that other bait up real quick. I've got this fish mad enough. He's about ready to go. Let's throw something small in there real quick. And so, but it just takes a lot of time, and every fish is different and every day is different. And I mean, I love doing it, but some days they'll make you pull your hair out.
There's nothing worse than having an hour left to weigh in and a 15-minute run back and working on that fish for 50 minutes because he's what's going to help you win the tournament. And sometimes them some bitches just don't bite.
No, that's just all there is to it. I've worked on them for 10 minutes and lost them and thought, gosh, dang it. And then come back later in the day and catch it. And then I've worked on them for an hour and a half and then finally caught it, and I've worked on a lot of them for 20 minutes and finally just said, let's go find a different one. But you can tell I've never really spent a bunch of time. Like I've never spent an hour or two on one that I didn't catch. It seems like I'm a lot more willing to pull the plug quicker than that, because if they just if they're just going to be that bad, we'll go find one that's ready to eat a little better.
They asked Jason Christie one time, they said, when do you know when to leave a bedfish? He's 5 pounds, 7 pounds, whatever he is, he'll help. When do you know when to leave him? And Jason had one of the best answers, I thought. He said, when it becomes personal.
Yeah, that's a fact.
He said, if it ever becomes personal, then you need to leave because you're going to stay way longer than you ever need to.
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, and they'll suck you in there too. I mean, it'll become to it. One of the ones that I always think about, and it turned out great, but I was at Chickamauga for a FLW event, and I had maybe 15 pounds, and I had like a 2.5 pounder in there, and I come across a bed that had 3 5 to 7 pounders on there, and I'm like, look at that, 3 of them on the same bed.
Wow,
So
little menage a trois.
Yeah, so I started fishing for them and everything, and I found out real quick that they wasn't interested in me, and I kept messing with them, and I told I didn't have a co-angler then. I had an observer. I told my observer, I said, man, I got to catch one of these fish. That's $10,000 right there on that bed. And so I said, I got 2.5 hours and I don't know any place else to go catch a big one. There's 3 of them right there. And so maybe an hour into it, one of them swam off. And I'm like, dadgum, that one left. And then the other one kind of got to where it decided that's my bed. And the second one decided that it was just going to hang out with it. But it kind of got aggressive to it. Like it'd go up there and bite it on the tail and it'd pick it on the side. And I'm like, look at this right here. And I hadn't really seen that before. And then it wasn't but a few minutes. And I caught the one that was doing all the picking and poking. And it weighed 6'5" or something or other, and it was a whole difference between having a top 20 cut or not making, And so anyways, but it took me probably, I'm going to say an hour and 15 or 20 minutes to put that fish in the boat when it was all said and done. And my observer actually fell asleep when I put it in the boat. When I went back to grab the dip net, finally, he's kind of coming around like, what the heck, And he was about half asleep. So, but anyways, but no, that's probably the one time that I've never seen that again like that. But they were definitely something, and then it kind of worked out. It can definitely make you think differently if you'd have spent all that time on them and not caught that fish.
Well, that we've covered bed fishing. I feel like if you listen to this podcast today, you're going to learn how to go catch them in the Ozarks. And you brought up a really good point. We're going to close here. Give me one fish in your career that you have lost that still haunts you to this day.
Man, I tell you what, I lost a giant one. I mean, a true bona fide giant at the Harris Chain my rookie season on a chatterbait about 15 or 20 foot from the boat out of some grass. And I don't know what I could have done, anything different, wrong, whatever. It just come up there and tried to jump. It couldn't really jump. It was so big, but it tried to jump, and the chatterbait just opened its mouth. I mean, I'd fought it for 30 seconds before this, and then the bait it opened its mouth and bait just came out. And I actually tied for the last check with Scott Canterbury and Larry Nixon, and I was the guy outside looking in at the end. I finished 51st and did not get the last $10,000 check when they paid 50 places over that. But that fish right there in my rookie season, I have still never forgot about it. Just it was probably the fact that it wasn't the $10,000 so much as it was that, I mean, it might have weighed 13, 14 pounds. I don't know what it weighed, but it was giant. Absolutely giant.
Well, that is awesome. That is awesome. We've all got a bunch of those. It seems like and looking back, you remember you don't remember the ones you catch as much as you do the ones you lose a lot of times. But, well, Law Dog, I really appreciate you coming in. They say you can't trust a lawyer, but I feel like you can trust this one right here. He's a bass catching fool and just a hell of an outdoorsman. You're one of the only guys I know that still trap and small game hunt and do it all. So.
Yeah, we're after it. If it'll run or swim from you, I'm game to chase it.
Well, get charge of them hounds and go see the wife. I really appreciate you being on here. And guys, y'all can take this to the bank.
Yeah, you can take it to the bank.